I mentioned a few weeks ago that Eastern Europe in general is mired in deathbed demography, and Ukraine in particular has one of the lowest fertility rates on the planet. On the other hand, Russia has a shrinking population, so all this sentimentalist claptrap about what a sterling job these Ruskies did in the Second World War is irrelevant, because that Russia is dead. It's face down in the vodka. It's now a geezer nation that no longer has hordes of surplus Russian youth to throw into the fight, which is why Putin is actively recruiting in Syria and from the ranks of ISIS. Paul Morland is a demographer who has a brand new book on tomorrow's demography coming out in the next few days, and I look forward to reading that book, as I've got a sort of amateur interest in demography, which is kinky and unusual, but is very relevant to where the world is headed. Paul, it's a strange war that's going on in Europe at the moment, because it's a war that's being fought between two powers, two nations that both are in serious demographic decline.
This is really unusual, and when we look at it, we think it seems strange because it's in Europe, and there's been a lot of criticism on the left about people saying, oh, we don't expect to see blonde-haired, blue-eyed people at war. But I think a lot of what's strange about it is that we associate wars with very young countries. Europe was quite bellicose when it had young populations. It has been pretty peaceful. Even places like the Balkans have aged a lot over the last 20 or 30 years, and the peaceful line has just about been held. And what is so unusual here is that you do have two relatively elderly populations at war. My sense is that the result is it can't possibly have the oxygen of somewhere like Syria or Yemen and go on and on for years and years. One way or another, this is going to end a lot earlier than places like Libya.
Yeah, you mentioned Syria and Yemen and Libya. The one I always think about is Afghanistan, which has one of the highest fertility rates on the planet. And so on the one side, you've got mums and dads who have 7 or 8 children. And on the other, you've got Westerners who have one designer yuppie kid at the age of 39. And it's a lot more difficult to throw your youth into war when essentially just one death eliminates your entire posterity in that way. And I wonder if the Afghan example.
I think you've put your finger on it. It's not that there's an absolute lack of young men in Russia or Ukraine. They're both quite big populations, and although relative to the size of their population and relative to the past, there aren't that many young men. There are quite a lot of young men, but if every one of those young men, or almost all of them, are single children, or one of 2 boys, or a boy and a girl, if those 5, 6, 7, 8 families are not the norm, then it's really difficult for people to sustain those kinds of losses. And when the body bags come home, if they come home, there will be a terrible price to pay for the politicians, which is why I think Russia appears to be, there's a lot of rumors circulating, but Russia appears to be making every effort to avoid body bags appearing and funerals being held in major population centers.
Yes, I find that very interesting. I take it he's made a calculation that he can't take the heat if there is too much sacrifice of young Russian men. What's interesting, of course, is that I crossed this border just over the weekend, is that the Ukraine borders Hungary, and as you go into Hungary from Ukraine, there's a big sign saying, "Welcome to family-friendly Hungary." And they're the one country that has made as their public policy priority the idea of increasing the size of families. Do you know why more? Putin has tried to do it but failed. Do you know why more countries don't do that?
Well, it's very interesting that the two people who've really tried very hard are Putin and Orban, who are gentlemen who have a certain amount in common. and might be seen as somewhat authoritarian, although Putin clearly more than Orban. I think it's very difficult for liberal democracies to start telling people what they see as their desired fertility rate. I think it's a very sensitive topic in liberal countries. I think somewhere like Britain, it would go down pretty badly. And the other thing which is interesting in Hungary is they've tried very hard to get their fertility rate up. They've put a lot of money into it. It's not clear it's really worked. The fertility rate has bounced a little bit, as it has in Russia. But the interesting thing in Hungary is they're really giving incentive to people having third children. That's where the money's going. And yet it's actually picked up a bit by people having first children and second children. So it's a bit of a technical point, but the evidence is that governments can be very effective pushing in the direction of history and getting fertility rates down by having programs of family planning and education. And they're moving in the direction of history as populations get richer and more urban. But what's really difficult, and no one's really cracked it yet, is to get the fertility rate up. And it's all very well to say, well, under Putin, it went up from 1.3 to 1.5 and briefly 1.7. Now it's down to 1.5 again. None of this is getting anywhere near replacement level.
No, which replacement level is generally regarded as 2.1. So even if you get it up from 1.3 children per couple or to 1.5 or 1.7, you're still in decline. And that's what makes this war so unusual. You know, when I was in Ukraine last week, almost everyone I met had one child. And there were a lot of people who had no children. That's a complete transformation in the way we look at things over the last couple of generations, isn't it?
And I think it undoubtedly has been linked to the fact that Europe has been a more peaceful place. So I think there is a very clear statistical link between family sizes and the likelihood of war breaking out. Now, social science is not mathematics, and this is an exception. Whether it's an exception that proves the rule, we have to wait and see. That rule will be proved if, as I feel, it's very likely that the oxygen simply goes out of this conflict. Now, that doesn't mean it's not horrendous, that a lot of lives aren't going to be lost and cities destroyed, but I just can't see populations like this keeping it going year in, year out, as we've seen in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, and in parts of Africa as well.
No, that's very interesting, Paul. Your new book is called Tomorrow's People. And in the crudest sense, it's not clear to me that either Ukrainians or Russians will be part of tomorrow's people. But you have a very interesting...
One thing I say in the book is that we've had groups in the past that we see as partly mythical or historical who've simply ceased to exist. There are no Goths or Visigoths anymore. Now, partly that's to do with changes in identity and assimilation and evolution of culture. But there is no reason to think there need be Japanese and Italian or Ukrainians and Russians if generation after generation people are not prepared to have a couple of children. Now, one of the problems in Russia... We're going to have
to leave it there, Paul, but we're going to bring you back because this is one of the most important topics of our time.